All right, welcome everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Katie Signer. I'm a senior associate at RMI and a co-author of our recent report, Seeds of Opportunity: How Rural America is Reaping Economic Development Benefits from the Growth of Renewables. And I'd like to first acknowledge my esteemed co-authors, Kevin Brem and Mark Dyson. Additionally, I'd really like to thank the many people who spoke with us to inform this report, who are listed in the report acknowledgement section, and in particular, NL Green Power. Thank you for partnering with us to provide the insights and connections that informed the Texas solar case study. So before diving into the report, I'll provide a brief overview of RMI for those not familiar with our organization. RMI is an independent, nonpartisan nonprofit with nearly 4 decades of experience in market-driven solutions to decarbonize the global energy system. We work with communities, businesses, utilities, and policymakers to identify and scale energy system transformations that will lead us to a clean, prosperous, and zero carbon future for all. The Seeds of Opportunity report is just one output in RMI's portfolio of work that go through these global programs listed here, just to thought leadership and business model innovation and other work that results in clean energy growth at speed and scale. I'm really happy to be bringing this webinar to all of you today to share the insight from this recent report and to foster a community of people who are interested in learning from the communities showcased in this study. They're the real leaders of the energy transition. So thank you also to the two gentlemen assembled here for giving us their time, and thanks everyone for attending and for your interest in this work. So our agenda for today, we will first have a brief introduction to the report. I'll share some of its key findings, and then we'll hear from our case study guests, Troy McCue from Lincoln County, Colorado, and Judge Dusty Kilgore from Upton County, Texas. Unfortunately, Josh Stillman from Newton, Iowa, a plant manager at TPI Composites, a wind component manufacturer, was unable to make it today due to an unavoidable business meeting. So hopefully he's signing a big new customer for his facility. But I'll speak a little bit to his community story as I can. And finally, after a moderated discussion with my two guests, we'll have a good bit of time at the end for Q&A with attendees. So if you think of a question during our discussion, drop it in the chat and I'll share out some of the audience questions during that final portion of the webinar. So let's get into it. I want to start off by sharing some of the motivation behind the Seeds of Opportunity report. Now, RMI and others have done quite a bit of research and modeling work over the years to better understand the trends of renewable energy growth in the US. Each year, we're seeing more and more wind and solar projects being deployed, and reports like the UC Berkeley and Grid Lab 2035 study project increasingly rapid deployment of renewables over the course of this decade. We have around 120 gigawatts of installed wind and solar today, and could reach over 700 gigawatts by 2030. So that's a lot of growth. And as these projects are being developed across rural America, and as you can see from the map, renewable energy is really taking root in a lot of different places in communities in every state. We wanted to better understand what the economic impacts of projects were locally and to assess renewables' potential to bolster rural communities that are in need of new industries and employment prospects. And we also wanted to learn and share what operating projects look like in these rural communities. So the case studies were an important part of the paper for us because they show what the jobs and revenues really mean for rural communities and how local community leaders played a role in bringing these projects into being. So we'll go back one. Here's what we found. Renewable energy represents a significant new rural commodity to harvest. with an economic output that's on par with other major rural industries like corn and soy and beef production. And I also want to note here that in many ways, renewable energy and agriculture can complement each other. So wind production, for example, can easily accommodate farming and ranching around the turbines, and we see many examples of that in projects across the Midwest and Western US. And while that's less common for solar projects, there's a growing trend towards exploring dual use opportunities there as well, like grazing sheep around the panels or using seed mixes that provide a variety of ecosystem services like habitat for pollinators and reducing soil erosion and things like that. And also, wind and solar land leases can provide a valuable insurance or hedge against the volatile commodity prices of agriculture and, certainly the weather inherent in farming. So helping to keep farmers and ranchers on their land and keep the ranch in the family, so to speak. And whoops, I'm trigger happy with my mouse. So the primary economic benefits we quantified in our analysis were tax revenues to local governments, land lease payments to rural landowners, construction jobs and wages, and operations and maintenance jobs and wages. These are the direct benefits that wind and solar projects create that are retained in the local community. And these projects also create indirect and induced economic impacts, sometimes called multiplier or ripple effects, from money being recirculated in the local economy. And we've highlighted examples of those as well in the case studies, but didn't quantify them in our analysis because those numbers are harder to predict. The case studies also reveal how the economic benefits I just described impact communities and translate into school improvements, landowners investing more in their properties, and local job creation. So yeah, all of the projects that we saw on the map earlier have places where they land and where these economic impacts become manifest. And the case studies in our report profile Eastern Colorado, which has seen thriving wind development in recent years, West Texas, where solar is now cropping up alongside the oil and gas and wind projects already established there, and Newton, Iowa, former headquarters of the Maytag Corporation, and now home to 2 wind component manufacturers. By talking to the people in these communities featured in the case studies, I learned some of the real meaning behind the economic development analysis I just shared with you all, and I'm excited to talk more about that with Troy and Dusty today. And these conversations that I had also revealed that wind and solar development are not without their challenges locally. So we put together a set of lessons learned and recommendations for local leaders who might see wind or solar development come to their communities in the coming years. Local county commissioners, economic development directors, and others in similar positions have a lot of say in wind and solar project siting and development. So there's a lot they can do, but it can be a daunting prospect to a community that's never hosted a project before. So this slide summarizes our recommendations for local engagement with wind and solar development. And our guests have experiences with several of the best practices identified here that they can speak to more in our conversation. For example, during the Rush Creek Wind Project's development in Colorado, Troy served as a kind of liaison between the developer and the community, helping community members to understand the project and what it meant and resolving issues that came up along the way. And in Texas, where there's a state regulation allowing for tax abatements for wind and solar projects currently, Judge Kilgore has experience negotiating those abatement agreements with both wind and solar projects that have come to Upton County. So on this slide, I've included some of the recommendations we put together for state and federal leaders. The focus of today's discussion is on the local level, but my co-authors and I would be happy to follow up with anyone who wants to learn more about how these best practices can ensure that rural communities maximize the potential value that the growth of renewable energy represents. So now I will turn it over to our speakers to introduce themselves. We'll start with Troy McCue, Executive Director of the Lincoln County Economic Development Corporation, followed by Judge Dusty Kilgore, and then I'll provide a quick summary of TPI's impact on the Newton community in Josh's stead. So Troy and Dusty, can each of you in a few minutes or so share a little bit more about your community and your role in it, and then summarize in 1 to 2 sentences what the arrival of wind or solar has meant for your community?
Thank you, Katie. My name's Troy McCue. I'm the Lincoln County Economic Development Director. I've been in my position for about 6 years now. I, before that time, spent 12 years as one of our local town representatives on our board of directors for economic development, and was around when some of the earliest wind project came to Lincoln County back in 2011. And that was the Rush Creek project out on the west end of Lincoln County. It was then followed by a series of 4 subsequent projects that have brought in excess of 4,500 megawatts, or that we're home to over 500 turbines in Lincoln County. And so we have part of, the very first one, which was Cedar Point Wind Project, followed by next era projects of Lyman 1, 2, and 3, and then Rush Creek 2. So it actually has 3 operating wind projects. We actually have almost 5 operating projects. There is one in development, and that is called the Renewable Wind Farm, which is an Arroyo project on the very east end of the county. We have subsequently seen the wind projects roll further east and further south along the plains of Colorado, and it's really been an interesting process. Just as indicated in Katie's earlier slides, we've seen always a little boom of construction activity with every subsequent wind projects, brought in 250 to 300 different construction workers that last anywhere from 14 to 18 months as they get those projects built out. And then it seems to be there's nearly a rough estimate of 4 to 5 permanent wind technician projects for about every 100 wind turbines. So it's really made a huge impact in that. In our county, in eastern Colorado, we have something called a use tax on the front end of these wind projects. And Lincoln County has actually reaped quite a bit of money from the front end use tax, and then the continued property taxes that are assessed each year. The wind turbines will depreciate. The value does go down over time. That is true. But nonetheless, it is still a very significant part, as it's indicated here, 42% of our local county tax base. So it's a big deal. I think the biggest deal for the local community, in addition to what it's done for the county treasury, is that it's really helped many rural producers with their income and their amount of money that they can recognize. We live out here on the edge of the arable plains. We don't have a lot of irrigation. We don't have a lot of aquifers. So agriculture is very much subject to drought, hail, and all kinds of different hazards in those crops. And the wind projects, for those who have wind turbines on their land, has really helped bring some long-term stability to our area for those hosting those turbines. Solar has not yet taken hold yet in our county, although the county recently adopted solar regulations. So we're looking forward to that in the near future. And I really think the solar piece can help fill in some of the gaps and help from a grid perspective, leveling out the green energy production off the plains. Right now, all of our power is exported to the west and makes its way into the Excel system along the Front Range of Colorado. And the newest project is slated to send that power also through the Excel system, but it's actually going to be traded for green credits over to the western slope into the Glenwood Springs area, called the Holy Cross wind project. The Renewable wind farm will be supplying that green energy. So yeah, we count 45 to 50 permanent jobs here. We really feel that the green energy thing is a perfect fit because, number one, it is not dependent on precipitation or rainfall, which is good because sometimes we have been in one of the most exceptional droughts we've seen in over 15 years right now, and that it's a great way to help stabilize some of our landowners' income. All in all, I really believe it's a huge benefit for our rural county. We look forward to our continued participation in the green sector industry, and thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Troy. So I'm going to switch slides here and turn it over to you, Mr. Dusty Kilgore.
Good morning, everyone. Here in West Texas, it's currently 11:20, so we're near noon time. My name is Dusty Kilgore. I'm the Constitutional County Judge of Upton County. That may be a little strange to people, but in Texas, the highest county elected official is the county judge. In rural Texas, the county judge has different hats. I am the CEO, so to speak, of Upton County, but also I'm the presiding member of the Commissioner's Court, but also I have judicial functions of all misdemeanor cases. So we have interesting aspect of how things work in rural Texas. Our oldest green project is over 10 years old. It was a wind farm that still exists and still going strong. It is now owned by Nextera. They've been a great partner. Our largest solar project, as you can see, is the Roadrunner solar project owned by Enel Energy. It has been operational as of last year. It has been in construction phase for a couple years. They did 2 phases. It's almost 500 megawatts, so it has taken them a couple years to get built. It has been a great opportunity to work with Enel in this solar project. They've been great community members. Upton County consists of 2 incorporated cities and 1 unincorporated. We're a smaller county, less than 6,000 people. Any given time, depending on what projects here, we go over that. The Enel project of the Roadrunner probably at peak had almost 400 to 500 construction jobs at one time. That is a huge impact for a local community. The local community that was impacted by this project was McCamey. McCamey runs about currently 3,000 people. And so when you have 500 construction workers converge on your town, the local businesses will prosper, especially your grocery store, your convenience stores, and your restaurants. They have flourished throughout these projects, and we hope they continue to be able to flourish. Interesting thing about Upton County, there's a huge project just west and south of the county as well in Pecos County, and some of those people choose to, during construction phase, stay in McCamey as well. So McCamey has flourished with these green projects. The biggest benefit to these projects to Upton County is to our schools and hospitals. The schools are able to really do some neat things with their school finances that these projects are available to provide in tax revenue for the schools. I would think that the schools are able to pay off any debt they have much earlier. The way our tax structure in Texas works with abatements, that is a huge program for taxpayers in the county. Enel has been a great partner to the schools. They have furnished many things that the school needs along with the hospitals. The county does get some tax benefit from there. We work off of abatements. They do ask the county, hospital, and schools to provide abatements for these projects. And that's it may take a while, but they can be very useful for all tax entities. But my job as county judge for Upton County is to make sure businesses flourish and private landowners flourish. And this Roadrunner project has provided both of those. So I'm glad to be here, and I appreciate Katie allowing me to be here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dusty. And I'm now going to just quickly summarize what's going on in Newton, Iowa, and then looking forward to getting into a discussion with you both. So Newton, Iowa, as I alluded to earlier, was the former home of the Maytag Corporation, and at one point the washing machine capital of the world. But in 2007, when Maytag was acquired by Whirlpool, the community lost its main employer, and manufacturing was really kind of the root of the local economy. But fortunately for Newton, thanks to some work that, Frank Leibel, who's I spoke with for the case study and who's the economic development director for Newton, along with some county and state counterparts of his, they were able to attract 2 wind component manufacturers to the community a year or so after Maytag left. So TPI Composites manufactures wind blades, and Arcosa manufactures the towers for wind turbines. And both of those companies arriving in the community helped Newton stabilize and recover from the loss of its former major employer. And today, TPI and Arcosa employ around 1,200 people in jobs that are some of the highest paying around. So they attract workers from outside of Newton, from neighboring counties in Iowa, into the community. And including Josh, one of his kind of personal anecdotes that he shared with me that I thought was really significant was that Josh, before the arrival of TPI Composites, had been working in manufacturing in Des Moines and working for Anderson Windows. But when TPI arrived in Newton, where he's from, and he had an opportunity to return home and work in the growing renewables manufacturing industry, he jumped at the chance and returned home to Newton and foresees a long career in the wind industry. So I thought that was a really kind of telling story about what manufacturing of clean energy technologies can bring to rural communities and local residents in those communities. Also of note, during the COVID-19 pandemic, as it was, really just getting started last year, TPI Composites, which has a factory in China, was able to get a lot of information about the virus pretty quickly, understand what the safety measures were that were needed, and helped the community of Newton respond pretty quickly and effectively to the pandemic, and helped keep the community members safe. So that's a little bit about what is going on in Newton. And if anyone has questions that they'd like to direct to Josh, he's kindly said that he'd be available to answer those via email. So drop those in the chat and I can pass them along to him. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let's see here. Yeah, turn back to Dusty and Troy. My first question for both of you, maybe we'll go in reverse order. So Dusty, you can tackle this first, and then Troy, is I'm curious for you to describe more what the outcomes you're seeing now that the projects, so Roadrunner in the case of Dusty, and the several wind projects that you mentioned, Troy, now that those projects are up and running, what are the outcomes that you're seeing in your community? And is there an impact that you see as most significant?
And talking about specifically with Roadrunner, Roadrunner is on top of a mountain near McCamey in Upton County. They are kind of out of sight, out of mind. A complaint that people can give about solar projects and wind projects is they take up some of the scenery. This particular project does not. And so that is a less complaint that we hear. The project, like I said earlier, at construction had 400 to 500 jobs. That was a significant for McCamey, but if there's a downside, once construction's over, there's not as many full-time jobs available. But Enel Roadrunner will, I think, remain a community partner with that. And so they will have 5 to 10 full-time jobs. Hopefully those 5 to 10 full-time jobs will reside in Upton County. We always try to get them to reside in the county where the project's going to be built, to provide incentives for their kids to go to local schools, for them to pay local property taxes, and to be community members. I think that it will happen in this case. They are just kicked off a few months ago, and so they're probably still in that period. But as long as they've committed to be community partners with the school, the hospital, and us and provide that, we in the county, our tax abatement consists of what's called a pilot, and that's a payment in lieu of taxes. And so the county receives X amount of money per year for taxes from Enel Energy. We're able to use that money to pour back into the community on projects. To talk specifically about Roadrunner, we are using this money to actually help finish building a community pool for Upton County. And so that's helped us greatly not to have to use money from your home taxes to have to do that. And so property tax owners are seeing a benefit with that. If I could, I don't know if anybody from Enel's on this webinar right now, but if I could throw out a name of Tom LaBaltier, if I say that correctly. He's been the site manager here for Enel on this project, and he has been great to work with because he's been a partner. Because when we give an abatement, we always tell the companies that we become a stakeholder in your company. We're giving you a tax decrease, and so we become stakeholders, and we need current information every year for that, or every few months. And he's been awesome to work with. I don't know if anybody else has had the opportunity to work for Thomas, but he's been great. But we look forward to having more projects with Enel.
That's great. Wow, a pool, that sounds really nice right now. I can't wait for pool season to come back to DC.
It gets super hot in here. It won't be a big thing for July and August to be 110 degrees plus. One thing Upton County has is we have no rain and we have plenty of sun and wind.
Good resources. All right, Troy, tell us about the impacts of the wind projects that are now up and running in Colorado.
I would characterize, like Dusty, I would characterize Lincoln County as no rain, plenty of sun. We're not quite that hot. Our summertime can get up to 100, but it's much more common to be in the 90s. Right now it's about 15 degrees and very, very cold. But nonetheless, yeah, I would say that we've been very fortunate in having good dialogue with our various green energy partners. One of them I point to in specific is Enbridge. Enbridge is the operating entity that took over the Cedar Point project. And there's one local administrative assistant. Her name's Dawn Arona. She is with Enbridge, and she participates in the Lyman Chamber of Commerce. I've seen her, I've met with her a few times in the Economic Development Office, and I find her to be a great asset for the local community. I also feel like the green energy, the rest of the players that are here sit on a great deal of potential for us to do more outreach and more community involvement. Housing is pretty much a very, very tight item in Lincoln County, and we are working on those in separate initiatives and trying to bring about more multifamily housing and more housing stock for sale. As we increase our housing, I also see that the permanent 50+ wind technician jobs that are here in our county would be a great addition to our local community. Many of these, I would say over 85% of the workers that help man all the wind farm centers, help run the computers and the algorithms and service the wind heads, change the oil and the wind turbines and do all the above. Over 90%, 85 to 90% of those are commuting in, and they're either living on the Front Range of Colorado and making that hour and 15-minute drive out to the turbines. I get that, but I sure certainly look forward to the opportunity to try to get them in working with our local chambers and our local city, trying to get them more involved in our local community. I think we set on some great potential there. The Green Energy Partners have done a good amount of scholarships. They have done some donations to various different events locally. But again, as a local nonprofit, I always feel like there's even more potential for greater engagement. So that's certainly on the top of our priorities and to-do list, is to get those closer connections so that we can keep incorporating our green energy partners as more and more core to our community.
Thanks, Troy. RMI is also always looking to increase our impact, so I resonate with that. I'm curious if both of you can speak to what were some of the most common questions asked in your community during the project development phase, and how did you or the developer help address those?
I can go first, Troy, or I'll go first. I think the biggest question was, and Troy spoke to this about housing, we have a lot of housing problems here with the projects because the 400 to 500 construction workers are not looking to buy a house or build a house. And so one thing that people are concerned about in this local communities are the RV camps, RV parks is what we call them, and they can sometimes be an eyesore. And so one of the biggest questions when it is known that a project's thinking about coming into Upton County is, are we going to have more RV parks? And so we try to work with local business owners that own these RV parks. We try to get them to engage into the construction companies to try to work that out the best they can. They want to know, the community members want to know, are they going to be loud and have parties and things like that? And so we try to work with them, and like a nail in the construction companies, they're great to have meetings with their workers about community concerns. They'll get everybody together and says, hey, we have some community concerns about y'all are partying too much, or whatever they community concerns, and so they have meetings at the sites about that. And so they always try to turn a negative into a positive. They've been great to work with that, and we can call them on the phone and discuss that openly.
That's good to hear. And just a quick follow-up, Dusty, if you don't mind. I also spoke with Chelsea Brandy at the McCamey EDC about the Roadrunner project, and I'm curious if McCamey or Upton County has also used the opportunity of the construction boom for Roadrunner and potentially the construction booms of projects to come to think about building more housing in a way that makes sense. Obviously, you don't want to overbuild, but is there anything being done on that front?
Yes, the EDC, the way the law is in Texas, the EDC can do things like that, and they've done it there in McCamey. I bet the EDC has been a part of building close to 10 houses in the last year. And so that's been a great boost. And it's kind of a twofold. You get people in those houses that are sending their kids to school, going to the grocery store and stuff like that, but also is there are new houses. And you could take a part of the city that may be needing some update to look better, and you flood these with these new houses, and immediately it does a great job. And Chelsea's been great advocate for doing that. She's done a good job doing that with the McCamey EDC. The lady that was before her spearheaded that project, and it's been great. Because housing is a concern, especially we're still in Upton County, we're still oil and gas is still king here, and so it helps with that front too. Because projects won't come to your city unless the infrastructure is there to help. Yeah. And so the EDCs are great partners.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and I would echo some of that as well. We've seen a great increase in our camping capacities. The one picture that Katie, you had on one of those earlier slides that had the mural painted wind turbine that was mounted vertically, that's actually at one of our newest campgrounds in Lyman. And the good news is those owners and operators did a very good job with a very clean, very upscale looking, it's called the Trailing Edge Campground. And they're kind of playing on the motif and the marketing of wind turbines. They have a leading edge car wash and a trailing edge campground, but they've done a great job. Also, the KOA here in Lyman is expanded. They are now going to be adding about another 70 spots or so. There's been a Genoa campground that opened up during the Rush Creek project, right before the Rush Creek project. And then there's a smaller one in the neighboring town to the east where I live, which is Araba. And so, yeah, we've seen that. And by and large, I can't say that has caused very many problems or been perceived by too many as too much of an eyesore or blight. Other concerns that have been expressed, in addition to the housing issue, is just what these turbines do to the visual view plane for folks who live out on the prairie. The blinking red lights at night ends up being a big topic of conversation. And the reality is there's so many red lights that do have to appear in a wind farm. Not every turbine here in Colorado has to be lit at all times, but there has to be enough of them to where it's a pretty much red blanket that does usually are all synced at one time. And so some people have complained about that in terms of messing up their evening sky viewing or their stargazing. But I also understand there's some new technology in the pipeline that might relieve some of that in that there can be real-time lights that only activate in the presence of aircraft that are, you know, close to the area and otherwise stay off. And that would make a huge, probably a huge improvement for that. So some people, there's been every theory floated on what are the effects of wind turbines on your health? What are the hum of the turbine things? Does it put out a vibration? Does it kill any birds? We happen to be in a rural part of the arid West that there has been no measurable impact to the bird populations whatsoever in our neck of the woods. But nonetheless, some people really do talk about living under the turbines. And it is something that is worth addressing. You can't just blow off all of that and say, oh, don't be silly, they're fine, because everyone's got a different temperament on what impacts their environment. And so what we found is it's great to make sure that there's enough open dialogue and things that can be discussed at the community level so that other people can share their experiences. But overall, the good news is, from an economic development standpoint, the positives of the turbines bringing income to those landowners is outweighing about probably 8-to-1 any sort of piled up negatives on the effects of having to live around the turbines.
Cool. Thanks, Troy. All right, I want to ask you all about your lessons learned and advice that you would give to any peers out there in the audience who, you know, work for rural governments or work in rural areas in any way. So the question for you both is, what lessons have you learned, and what would you tell your peers if they were to ask you if and how they should foster wind or solar development in their community or close to their community?
Go ahead, Troy, I'll let you start.
Okay. One lesson that I learned, especially in the most recent project, was that the folks that were going to start putting together their easements for the transmission lines and the turbines and all of it all put together, first had what I would consider kind of a botched early attempt at their marketing efforts. And they really kind of came in with a heavy hand and said, you know, we can do this, we're a public good, and we're going to do this regardless. And they even, you know, threw out the word eminent domain, and that goes over like a lead balloon. It just doesn't fly. And what happens is, I realize eminent domain is in the law books for certain things, for certain isolated incidents, but if you try to use that as a broad stroke from a marketing standpoint, you're going to get so much political pushback that the entire thing would tank. They then were smart enough to retool, bring in a new consultant, and he was very adept at coming in and mending the fence and making all of those relationships, repairing all of those relationships. And it took him a number of months to do that. And once he did that, this is a project that's just about to be announced on when they're going to start construction. So my message, especially for those that are trying to do these developments, is engage with your community, the Economic Development Office, your local chambers and local government as soon as possible to get that dialogue going so that you don't get started on the wrong foot. I think the amount of energy it takes to undo something like that far outweighs how much time and effort it'll take just to start on the right foot and to try to establish those relationships that this is a positive thing for the community and they're wanting to work with the local community. And I think that's one of the bigger lessons that I've certainly seen.
I think for me, the biggest lesson is that this has to be a team effort, not only from the wind or solar company, but also from the superintendent of the local school and the CEO of the local hospital. We have now, when a project is interested in coming in and seeking an abatement, instead of these projects trying to meet with the heads of the agencies individually, we ask them to do it all together, myself, the superintendent of the local school, and then the CEO of the local hospital, because they're going to be asking for abatements from all three of us. That is a must. If they can't get all three of us to agree and to be on board, then they're going to be spinning their wheels. But the main I think the most important is to have the community support for the project, because in all reality, I'm an elected official. If I don't have the community support for the project, I'm not for it. But Enel and other companies have gotten used to that, and they do community outreach, trying to gain a response from the community on how they feel about the project, because in West Texas, some of these projects can be viewed negatively unless the right amount of outreach is accomplished. Also is the way tax structure in Texas works is we see a tax benefit, the hospital and the school. The local city sees zero tax benefit from these projects because they're not building in the city limits, obviously. And so we now have asked all the companies to provide some type of tax payment to them, and they all have. So we try to benefit every taxing entity and every community member, and that's I think the biggest advice I'd give any community is make sure everybody's meeting together and not separately, because what's good for the school is good for the county and good for the hospital.
Yeah, thanks to you both. That's really illuminating. So my last question before we open it up to some of the audience Q&A that I'll field is, I'm just curious what your plans are for the coming year with respect to the renewables projects in your community. I know, Troy, you've talked about a project that's in the pipeline, but yeah, like what's next for y'all? Dusty, are you seeing new solar projects potentially coming in? If you could share a little bit about that, that'd be great.
We just signed an agreement and abatement with a wind company, Troy Global. I think they're based out of Dallas, Texas. They'll be building a wind farm near Rankin. They were the latest one to sign an abatement, and so that one, really all of our plans that we discussed as a community of what has to happen for us to do the abatement all came together with this company. And so I think there would be a great company to work with. You know, I hear some chatter and gotten some phone calls about some battery backup systems. I know that's super popular to try to store some of the energy and then release it in peak times. I would like to get more into that with some of these companies. I think that might be a project that is worth discussing on a large scale. We're in rural America, in rural Texas, so we have a lot of land. And so we would like to engage with these companies on developing these big projects. You know, that's something I'm interested in, is upscale these projects so that it's easier to sell to the communities.
And we're, like I said, we're getting excited about the Araba wind farm project that's next to the pipeline. I would echo Dusty's discussions about battery storage, because some of the later bids that have come into Xcel Energy in our neck of the woods really are the cheapest rates are solar plus storage or wind plus storage. And if there's the economics of what that storage does for the entire grid is kind of astonishing, and it's really pushing coal-fired electricity to become the most expensive generated item, which used to be completely inverse of that. So I think economy of scale of green energy is really starting to take hold. I'm excited about, again, our new wind project, but I think what's next on our punch list of things to do as an economic development organization is our greater engagement of our green energy partners to try to make that more robust. Because I think from that relationship, not only do we get more community participation, more support, there are also those more robust conversations that I think can lead to even more development as we try to look at some of those additional benefits of solar. We'd like to see the addition of solar. I'd like to make sure that we choose the ground for those solar projects that are not the best farm ground in our area, so that we optimize land use. But also that these storage solutions, as Dusty mentioned, could also be a big deal in harvesting a lot of this wind, socking it away and then letting it out when the wind once in a while does not blow. So
yeah, great. So I am going to turn to our list of audience questions, and we'll get to as many as we can, and then try to field the rest after the webinar. But the first question is for you, Troy. Can you talk a bit about any workforce development efforts that you undertook or your area undertook to support the construction and maintenance of the wind farms?
Yeah, we have engaged with our local community college. We have not been able to get a wind technician curriculum put right here in Lyman, but nonetheless, we work with Northeastern Junior College, and they have a wind tech program in Sterling. Sterling's about 110 miles away from us to the northeast. And so those have been some of those efforts. Our good working relationship with Morgan Community College, who is our local college for workforce development, continues to work in those areas. The challenge lies in getting enough instructors and enough students gathered all at one time to make that class, financially feasible for college. We're still working on that. When it comes to other areas of trying to retain workforce, they've generally been centered around the promotion of all trades, trying to make sure that we're encouraging as much trade training and scholarship support for the trades, because many of those skill sets, whether it's electricity or welding and such, really work very, very well in this wind farm environment. And then they don't require an enormous amount of additional training to be able to join the ranks there. We have a lot more we can do for workforce training. Trust me, I'd love to get a wind technician regular associate's degree placed here at Morgan Community College right here in Lyman. That would be awesome. We're not there yet, but I do think growing our own is a huge benefit for our area.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Troy. I've got one for you, Dusty. Can you expand on the neat things schools are doing with their income?
Say that again, Katie, you broke up.
Oh, sorry. The question is for you to elaborate on what some of the neat things are that schools are doing with their income from the tax abatements.
I know one of their playgrounds was actually donated from one of the projects. Both schools have recently built new facilities. We have 2 school districts in the county. Both schools have built additional facilities to withhold more students and to better their services to the students. They do bonds to be able to do that, and they're able to pay off their bonds early. If it's a 25-year bond, they're able to pay it off in 20 years, which is a benefit to the taxpayer. Mm-hmm. And these projects, they become taxpayers too. And so it's a benefit to not only oil and gas, to local citizens, but also these projects as well. I know Rankin ISD off of bonds has, in the next 2 years, will have brand new facilities, high school, elementary, and everything off of bond money. And they're projecting that because of certain projects and certain oil and gas projects, along with the green projects, they'll be able to pay it off 5 to 10 years early.
That's great. All right, another one for you, Troy. You mentioned changes coming up at the county level to accommodate solar. What changes are being advocated for that?
Basically, what I was referring to was the Board of County Commissioners and the Land Use Administrator in Lincoln County recently adopted setback rules for solar installations. They also finally made permanent some setback rules for wind turbines as well. And all of this says that there's got to be so much distance between a home or another structure. And we're trying to make sure from an economic development perspective that those setback provisions make sense. There have been some numbers thrown out that good grief, it's got to be a half a mile from anything. And if you do that, it invalidates huge tracts of land that we really don't think make sense. There are some other provisions in the land use regulations. I'd have to get them out to really get into the weeds, but I have found that Lincoln County's adoption of those land use regs are reasonable, and they were not scaring off our potential green energy partners. And it's something, and it's not that we won't have to revisit those from time to time, or if there's a specific solar project coming to Lincoln County that we need to revisit that and make sure that we're in line. I'm guessing we probably will be going through that process, but those were some of the recent things that have been accomplished over the last year.
Gotcha. Yeah, and just to note that doing that kind of work proactively and examining your local ordinances, land use policies, and setbacks and things like that is one of our best practices. So good for you for doing it before the projects are coming in. It's good to be prepared. And now have a question that's just general, so feel free, either of you who wants to jump in first, go for it, and we can hear from either or both of you. The question is, can you speak to job quality? So what percentage of the jobs in wind or solar in your communities are union or prevailing wage with health and safety benefits, especially post-construction in the ongoing O&M workforce?
We don't have unions in West Texas. The full-time jobs that happen after construction, they disclose how much they're going to make to us. That way, we know that those jobs can compete with the oil and gas sector, because what we don't want is low-paying jobs here where they're constantly having a rotation of employees, because we all know rotation of employees is bad for business. And so they disclose how much individuals will make in full-time capacities, which makes it easier for us to be a part of these projects, because we know they'll compete with oil and gas and become community members. And so we think it's great.
Yeah, we also don't have unionized labor here for any of the projects. They are very solid, good paid positions. These are it goes back to Economic Development 101. In some of my training as a developer, it says, don't get lulled into the myth that a job is a job is a job, because if you bring in a bunch of very, very low paying, well under your local AMI, then as Dusty alluded to, you have a lot of job rotation, but then you also create a host of other issues on job rotation and unemployment, et cetera. So that the jobs that you want to add to your local economy need to be at your county AMI or better. And these wind technician jobs that we have for the O&M are well above that AMI for us. So we see those jobs as a very great asset to our local job market.
Okay. Thanks both. And kind of a related question. Someone's asked, is there any job retraining so there could be an ebb and flow between the oil and gas sector and wind and solar, either construction or operations jobs? Have either of you seen that?
Dusty, you know more than I do about that. We don't have a lot of oil and gas here.
Right, and Nell has recently reached out to me and started a conversation of doing just that, trying to, we know what COVID has done to the oil and gas sector, so we do have some unemployment in Upton County, and Nell has reached out and asked what we can do as partners to provide some retraining that they could go from oil and gas and into the green sector. And so I think this year, hopefully, we will get into those projects. We don't have any community colleges here, but we have them all surrounding. Specifically, there's a wind tech program in Sweetwater, Texas, that many people around here participate in. So I predict in the next year or two that we'll see a lot of training in this county to transition from oil and gas to green if people choose to. We have not seen a huge unemployment rate here due to oil and gas. It's been minor, but we'll see what the oil and gas sector does this year.
Awesome. Good to know. And okay, so on a slightly different tack here, question about how do you work with local residents who worry over a decrease in their property values because of the new project? And once a project is operational, have you seen actual property increases or maybe decreases in your area?
Well, from our perspective, Colorado land values have continued to go up, up, and up. And this is the burgeoning Front Range of Colorado, where there's 5 million people all up and down the Front Range, and we're only an hour east of that. So those real estate values and even farm ground and pasture ground have all been bringing higher and higher values that we've not seen in prior years. So no, we have not seen property values drop for any reason due to the presence of wind turbines. I can't speak yet to the solar, but I can't imagine that it would do very much for property decrease. I suppose if you're talking about changing your view plane in a higher tourism area, I can see where that argument could be made. But out here, when it's rural farm ground and cattle ranching, and then we add the turbines and such, I would say that the whole sum net are sustained and decent land values moving forward.
For Upton County, we're not going to see a decrease, because the land surrounding these projects is agricultural ranching, and so they're already ag exempt. And so the decrease in the property value, I have not heard of any of that going on, and I don't predict it would ever happen. So.
Okay, good to know. All right, so one last question, I think, and then the rest we'll have to save for follow-up. Curious if you could comment on a major obstacle that had to be overcome to build any of the projects you all saw in your area, and how that was surmounted or addressed.
I think I've already touched on that, and maybe Troy has a little bit.
I'm going to go back. Yeah, something I said in an earlier webinar on with this group, and that is that the hardest piece of any project here are the easements for the transmission lines. And once the transmission lines are built that are going to funnel the green energy to the front range of Colorado, they are almost instantly filled. So there seems to be a backlog, a great deal more of desired capacity for generation than there is capacity to transmit it. And so I think the hardest piece, in fact, I was on a very in-depth call with the Yerba wind farm developer this week, talking about two particular landowners that they're really getting a lot of heartburn over on trying to get across their land. And they've even had to use right away from the county, as long as the neighboring landowner was fairly compensated, to try to make their way through that on transmission lines. So I think there needs to be a paradigm shift, because it's perception by the public that I have observed that they feel like a wind turbine on their land is like a 21st century oil well. I know it doesn't put out near the dollars that some oil wells do, but yet it's very steady and it lasts very predictably for a good 30 years. And yet it's a one-time payment up front for a transmission line. And they feel like, okay, yeah, I'll take that one-time payment, but now have this burden of always putting up with these transmission lines for the rest of my life. So I really feel that maybe the ultimate solution is to try to elevate the importance in our area of transmission infrastructure by perhaps putting that on an annual payment as well, so that people feel like they are going to be long-term better compensated. I feel that that's going to be a necessary change moving forward if we're going to have to continue to add more and more transmission capacity.
Sure. Dusty, anything to add? Or
we have to get the community involved from day one of one of these projects, and we'll remain successful. Like I mentioned with the oil and gas, it's still king here, and we invite any sector to thrive in Upton County. And we participate in any type of program that a business will be able to provide more jobs. Our duty as local government is to make it easy on residents and businesses. So we'll continue to do that.
Great. Well, thank you so much to both of you. I really enjoyed this conversation. And just to note a few pieces of housekeeping at the end here. Everyone who attended can expect a follow-up email with information on how to stay in touch, get more information, and a link to the webinar recording. We'll do our best to answer unaddressed Q&A by following up with these two gentlemen as they're willing to field additional questions. And thank you so much again to Troy McCue for joining us from Lincoln County, Colorado, and to Judge Dusty Kilgore calling in from Upton County. It's great to speak with you both today.
Thank you all.